Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I want to talk about what changed after 9/11. Today marks 18 years after the 9/11 attacks, which is one of the darkest moments in American history, and that also means that young people born after 9/11 are now 18 years old and they can vote for the very first time. For me as a slightly older person, this is kind of scary because I don't like post 9/11 America. I would like to return to its pre 9/11 better, safer, and happier state. It was a simpler, freer, and better time, but unfortunately an increasing number of people have forgotten what that world was like, or maybe even never knew it to begin with. So today I wanted to talk about a little bit before 9/11 and a little bit after, so you can see how huge of an event this was, not only on our geography, but our economy, our government, the psychology of our entire nation. It was crazy, crazy powerful. After the 9/11 attacks happened on Tuesday, my whole school pretty much went on lockdown immediately. All classes were effectively canceled, but we had to stay in school because it was safe. So every class we went to, we just watched the news. We just watched the news, we learned, we talked, we did almost nothing. They let us use our cell phones to call our parents, which would have been really rare at the time. But we didn't really do a whole lot. For pretty much the entire rest of that week, Wednesday through Friday, we didn't really do very much in class. We mostly just watched the news, and one of the reasons is because the teachers did not care either. The teachers were just as concerned as we were, and they wanted to get the latest story possible, and we just didn't do school. As kids are gonna be kids, and they're gonna be bad, we blamed some of the foreign teachers and some of the foreign students and just about anybody that wasn't American, like, do you know who did this? Who did this? Was this your family? Do you know? Blah, blah, blah. A lot of it was admittedly in a joking manner, but I doubt it felt like it was joking to them. I mean, most of us knew there weren't like criminal masterminds going to a small school in the South, but it was probably more hurtful than most of the people making those jokes had intended. School shootings by this time had already become I don't want to say popular, a well-known phenomenon. So we'd already, had lockdown drills, and we had school security, and we had little changes in rules. In private school, it wasn't as bad. But after 9/11, school security just massively increased, like right through the roof. It was crazy just how much security there was, especially now that terrorism was becoming a thing on top of school shootings. That Wednesday, I remember church being absolutely packed. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar, a lot of churches do have a Wednesday service. Wednesday service is usually the slowest one of the week, very, very low attendance. Wednesday night, everybody I knew was scared. I was there too. It was just insanely packed. It was like Revival Sunday levels of packed. And on the following Sunday, there were so many people coming to church that they had to bring in seats from the cafeteria and just anywhere they could find them and just line the aisles and pews and just squeeze as many people in as possible. I've never seen that many people in my little church before, and it was the same at churches around the entire United States. It was just completely full. Every auditorium, every pulpit, everything was just completely packed. Our sermon that Sunday was primarily about life after death with Jesus through salvation and going through heaven, and it was also about faith in God for security for various things and not having to be afraid of worldly fears. It was a very good and I remember accurate, timely message. But the reason church attendance was so high was that people were legitimately terrified that they could be next. Like and this might as well have been the apocalypse for all they knew, because we didn't really know very much. Not much information would come out until almost a week later, but lots of people were just guessing that this was the very start of a big wave of attacks, that this was the opening note in a chorus, and that they would just go on and on and on, and we'd be hammered with this for years and years and years. And even in my tiny little hometown in the South, we were afraid of bombs, we were afraid of terrorism, we were afraid of airplanes and buses and water plant sabotage and just about anything you could think of. This level of mortal fear for the first time in our sheltered Western lives, just super high church attendance. It's just like the more afraid you are, the more you're going to go to church, because the more you're afraid of dying, the more you want security after death, right? It didn't last very long though. Every weekend church attendance got smaller and smaller until it was roughly back to the same size, and I think that was probably proportional to people's fear of terrorism. They went from like, oh my god, we could be next this very moment, to slowly realizing that life could go back to normal. at least in most ways, a lot of things didn't go back to normal. Flying anywhere for anything became a nightmare overnight. I said night too many times in that sentence, but most of you now only know the TSA procedures. You know you have to get there like 2 hours early. You have to wait in this super long line. You could pay for TSA premium. They're going to check your feet. For me, they always check my butt. I don't know why, but that wasn't always the case. Airport security used to be very, very lax. There was a metal detector for your bag and a metal detector that you walked through. Security took always less than 15 minutes, a lot of times less than 5 or 6 minutes. It was very, very swift. They didn't have Border Patrol agents or TSA. They were just private security guards like mall cops. They competed. They weren't super well trained or anything. They weren't like professionals. They just looked for guns and bombs, basically, and they didn't. It was so lax, you probably could have brought all kinds of guns and bombs on plane. It'd have been so easy. But on top of that, you could get into the terminal without having a ticket. Like, if you wanted to just meet your family member as soon as they got off the plane, you could just go through and like tell them, like, yeah, I'm meeting somebody, and they just let you through. It's not a big deal. If you wanted to, you could go into the airport not to meet somebody and with no ticket, just to eat at the restaurants. Or what a lot of people did is they would get a vacation and they'd go to the airport and they would literally go from terminal to terminal asking what the rates were, if there were leftover seats, if there were discounts, if there was, like overstock or oversell or whatever, because you could just go and haggle with people at the counter and buy your tickets cheaper, or just do like a last minute, like impulsive vacation thing. You could even go into the cockpit of the airplane to talk to the pilots while they were flying. This was mostly if you're a little kid, they give you the little pilot wings thing. That program got shut down. It was much easier to transport goods that are now considered contraband, like lighters and nail clippers and water and snacks and gun parts and all sorts of little things that can now get you pulled into that little interrogation room. This level of freedom of travel and ease of travel died immediately and never came back. In my opinion, airports became much, much worse after 9/11. They're much slower, much less efficient, much more scary, and more importantly, they became a constitution-free zone. Like your Fourth Amendment, some parts of your First Amendment, and a lot of your rights are suspended when you're going through TSA in order to give us security. And the same thing pretty much happened at customs, border checkpoints, and border patrols got crazy powers that supersede the Constitution somehow thanks to that good old Patriot Act. On a political note, pretty much every single thing got worse in terms of government governance, and the whole psychology of the country. As a brief sidetrack, I really strongly dislike President Trump. I don't think that's a secret. I dislike him for a whole variety of reasons that aren't that hard to see, like suggesting that we nuke hurricanes, or obstruction of justice, or jokes about restricting the First Amendment, and things about that. Anyway, you can put all that aside, my biases, whatever, but I will tell you right now, this day, that Donald Trump is a much better president than George W. Bush. I think George W. Bush is going to go down in history as one of the worst leaders of all time, no matter what dumb stuff our current president tweets or says or who he wants to troll or whatever. But Trump didn't roll back our constitutional rights with the massive and intrusive Patriot Act. He didn't initiate the biggest spying program in the history of mankind. He didn't waste $10 trillion on two pointless wars that achieved almost no objectives, largely destabilized the Middle East, and created an entire generation of, in some capacity, damaged combat veterans, PTSD, physical damage, all sorts of young people just got completely ruined, just put through the meat grinder in these wars. And he also didn't create a boogeyman out of terrorism. The political state in the US rapidly evolved from relatively boring debates about taxes or drug laws. We had the war on drug. There was obscene media and porn, and Bill Clinton got a blowjob and stuff like this, to very, very rapidly we almost turned into a police state, and the leadership at the time was so afraid of terrorism that they inadvertently, or perhaps as some people would say, purposefully created a true Orwellian enemy. If you want a little extra reading today, you can read about Orwell's enemies, but there's sort of paradoxes that you can't beat, because if you think about it, terrorists now are at the same time smart. They're clever like foxes. They find a weakness and hit you. But they're also dumb. They're uneducated. They're third world bumpkins. They're taken advantage of, blah, blah, blah. Terrorists are very strong, they're powerful, they could kill you at any moment, they fight our military, blah, blah, blah. But then they're using old Russian weapons, they can't beat us in regular combat, they're not a good fighting force, they crumble under pressure, blah, blah, blah. And you can apply this to just about anything about terrorism. A great example. There aren't very many terrorists. I think most of you would agree that in the world as a whole, there's not a lot of actual terrorists. But the way we see them and the way that we're taught about them is that they could be anywhere at any time and they could strike any moment. There could be terrorists right across the street from me, living and running a secret cell of terrorism in Dallas, Texas here, for all I know. And that kind of mindset creates an enemy that is strong and weak, everywhere and nowhere, smart and dumb, can't be killed, can't be conquered, can't go away. And it's also the focal point of almost every single governmental decision since then. We have to consider well, how will this affect terrorism? How will this affect security? Even if it's the most minor thing. And in my opinion, this is the reason that so very, very many stupid, regressive, and counterproductive laws were passed to protect us. We've been at war in some capacity for the last 18 years. It's been the longest war that we've ever had. Do you remember an America that was not at war? Because even though I grew up in a time of peace, I almost don't. It's been that long. There was a time where we were not at war. We weren't deployed anywhere. We did little peacekeeping missions. We sent troops to the UN. We would meddle. The CIA would send in small groups, but it wasn't trillion dollar wars. It was like literal like single squads out on action. And on that same note, when we talk about the boogeyman of terrorism and whole the psychology of the United States, we got to talk about Islamophobia. In general, knowledge of Islam in general in the United States changed rapidly after 9. I think I've said the word rapidly. I'm going to say quickly after 9/11. It became a thing in less than a week. Before 9/11, almost nobody in my small town knew what a Muslim was. If you went out and interviewed people in the street, maybe 1 in 5 of them could give you like the textbook definition that you would find if you just typed Islam into Google or something like that. Even less people would be capable of telling you anything about it, what the beliefs are, how it evolved, the history, and any real education on the subject. They weren't really seen as enemies of America to most normal people. They were foreign, but foreign in a good way. They were exotic, they were rare, they were cultured, they were educated, and that was sort of a stereotype similar to what we apply to Asians because a lot of doctors and engineers from those countries were immigrating, and they were largely considered harmless for the most part. But then 9/11 happened. And we all learned that it was Afghans or Saudis and Islam and this kind of stuff. And brown people of all kinds became public enemy #1 in America just the minute the news broke. I remember at the time, I think I was still using like Yahoo Mail, or maybe it was like AOL Mail. Probably AOL at that time. But that's when chain mail was a thing. And I kept getting all these crazy chain emails with just stuff about Islam all the time. Some of it true, some of it completely made up nonsense. But it was now what you would probably call hate speech. It was just some really like hard anti-Islam sort of stuff in my inbox every single day. It's the only thing people would talk about. The amount of jokes I heard about nuking the entire Middle East and turning it to glass and then harvesting the glass for, I don't know, silicon processors or something, or how we should just kill them all, and a lot of racial slurs and stuff that I'd never heard about brown people just popping up super, super fast. It went from no knowledge to intense hate in about a week or less. So good luck going through the TSA now if you're any browner than maybe some are tan. And on this same topic, there are lots of things about the teachings of Islam that I 100% disagree with. And I'll tell this to anybody, regardless if YouTube calls it hate speech or whatever. I don't agree with Islam on a lot of things. And I do understand that radical Islam was a growing problem in the world as a whole, and that it would have eventually become a Western problem no matter what. We would have run into it, we would have had to do something about it. But what could have been avoided by 9/11 is the widespread hate and distrust of Muslims as sort of a collective ethnic group, even though it's really like 50 or 60 ethnic groups all smushed together. But if you were brown, even Indians and Sikhs and this stuff, it didn't matter. If you were Muslim, it didn't matter what age, race, gender, whatever. You were all just put in this one group of you are a terrorist and we hate you and we hate everything about you and you are the enemy of Christianity and you are the enemy of the West and you are the worst. And just that sort of blanket hatred of people instead of a disagreement on their beliefs could have been avoided, because personally, I think it's entirely acceptable for you to disagree with any belief and tell anybody anywhere that their beliefs are wrong, because nobody should be shielded from criticism. But I do believe that it's, at least for my personal morals, wrong to just blanketly hate a group of people as a people instead of as an idea. So that's just me kind of reminiscing a bit and spitballing. I feel like an old person telling you youngins what stuff was like before 9/11, but it just kind of was on my mind this morning when I woke up. It's what I wanted to talk about, and there isn't much point to this video other than me hoping that you learned something about the world before, and I hope that enough of you agree that the America before 9/11 was better than the America we have now, and maybe we can try to get some of it back. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.